the Council.
Welcome everybody to today's meeting, which is a hybrid meeting. The meeting will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting.
Recording in progress.
Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and a recording will be available through the Council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members that translation facilities are available and for those attending on Zoom to choose the language of choice. For those wishing to speak in the chamber, please raise your hand. For those on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. We will alternate between speakers in the chamber and on Zoom. For those attending remotely, please note that those in the chamber will be unable to use the chat facility. Committee members who are attending remotely are required to leave their camera on throughout the debate and when voting in order to maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. If you do need to leave the meeting temporarily, pop a message in the chat function so the Democratic Services Officer is aware and then let us know when you return. I expect everyone present and participating in this meeting to conduct themselves appropriately, be respectful to each other. That applies to members, officers and anyone in the public gallery. So we'll move on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest, Code of Local Government. Members are reminded they must declare their existence and nature of their declared personal interest. Would anybody like to declare an interest? No. Agenda item 3 is urgent matters. I'm not aware of any urgent matters. Agenda item 4 is matters referred to the Cabinet by a scrutiny committee for consideration. To receive any petition on behalf of residents calling on Conwy County Borough Council to use its powers to consult with the public and listen over which roads should be exempted from the new default 20 mph speed limit. That's on pages 3 to 4. Gromley, do you want to introduce us? No, obviously.
Yeah, this petition came to Economy and Place, if I remember correctly, asking for us to hold a public consultation regarding the 20 mph rollout in Conwy. Currently, there is a ongoing review. The Welsh Government have appointed a body to look at the criteria for reviewing the 20 mph process. They hope to have done their conclusions by early spring, well, late spring, they said, and then the report will be going to Welsh Government early autumn. And until then, we not in a position to judge how to review these 20 mph limits. There is not a consultation, there is a process where members of the public and town and committee councils can already email the ERF department to raise their concerns or make observations. We've had to date about 200 since I announced it in Economy and Place. 200 replies have come in pointing out different areas of concern, and our officers are evaluating those. And I say once we've had the revised criteria, which hopefully will be in early autumn, we will bring it back to Cabinet to decide whether we need to go to a further consultation or whether we can act on the information we've gathered by then.
Right, thanks, Conwy. Louise?
Thank you, Councillor Gromley, for listening to the petition at the scrutiny meeting and for taking everything on board. It's a shame it's going to be early autumn, but I don't see us being able to do it any quicker. The way we should present the consultation, there was a discussion about you and me getting together how that could look. And just to throw it in there, even though it's going to be a few months away, is the way that you look at the public footpaths. We were sent a link through the members' democratic services about how there's a map with all the public footpaths on across the county, and you can zoom in and find out which ones are closed and open. That sort of online map is what I was thinking about for the roads, essentially something simple like that people would have to make the effort to find, and we could promote it through social media, online, etc. We're not talking about posting things through people's letterboxes or meetings in town halls or anything like that. So something quite straightforward. But as I say, until you get the Welsh Government guidance to feed back into it, I presume you'll just collate all these emails from people, and let's see where we go from there in early autumn. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Certainly, the officers are evaluating the views that come in as we speak. They seem to be on similar lines, similar areas. As I 200 we'd had by the beginning of the week, whether we've had more since then. And as you said, we look for the simplest way of consulting on those. Obviously, there's a cost implication if we go out for a full public consultation, which in these current financial climate is his job to justify that. But as I say, as soon as we have the criteria, hopefully we will have collated more information anyway, and I'll bring it back to cabinet then to decide which is the best way forward.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm sure you two can sort of get together and try and bring something that satisfies everybody, and we'll look to move forward as and when we get the appropriate guidelines. So yeah, thanks for coming, Louise. Thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 5. This calling decision was withdrawn yesterday at the scrutiny committee, so I don't think we need to discuss it today.
No,
Matt?
no need to, Chair. Leader, it's been withdrawn.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 6 is announcements by the leaders. I'm delighted to say that this year Arias Park will play host to the under-18 Women's Six Nations competition. So unlike the sort of Six Nations that you would watch on the TV, this is effectively a sort of festival of rugby, which takes place over 3 days. We'll have England, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, France and Italy. All the teams, competitors, their parents and families will be coming to stay over the 3 days. So yeah, Friday the 29th there'll be 6 matches. Tuesday the 2nd of April there'll be 6 matches, and then the sort of finales will be on the Saturday the 6th of April. North Wales is particularly strong in the under-18s. It's got the fastest growth of female rugby across Wales, so it's something we should be really proud of. I would expect to have really good representation from North Wales in those sides that are competing. So yeah, really good for our economy, really good for our young people, and really good to showcase the work we've done in putting on the 4G pitch in Arias Park. So nothing else from me. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is announcements by the Chief Exec.
Nothing for me today, Leader.
Okay, so agenda item 8 is to review the Cabinet Forward Work Programme. It's on pages 8 to 34. Members, are there any comments or observations? If not, can we show them in favour of accepting the Forward Work Programme? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the first substantive item, which is agenda item 9. It sits within my portfolio. It's the Revenue Budget 23-24 Quarter 3 Monitoring Report, and the report is on pages 35 to 47. Just bear with me a second. Okay, members, so this basically is an update on our spend in the current year. It's against our original budgetary assessment of the money that we would require to deliver services. The headline figure in 1.2, we're still facing budgetary pressures in year of £1.707 million, but this is an improvement over the second quarter when the overspend was forecasted at £3.831 million. The full details are given in Appendix 1 of where those pressures are. You will note that we have changed the way that report is noted. On scrutiny, members were concerned about the impact it would have on services. So you will see in columns 6 to 8, there is now full details about how they have changed over the particular quarter. 3.3 sets out where we continue to meet pressures. It highlights the nature of the services that we provide, that they're demand-led in many cases. So in issues around homelessness, we will still meet that need. We've seen rising costs in home to school transport. You'll be aware we're doing a consultation on looking at how we can adopt that or modify that in terms of bringing those costs down, so we've got better revenue to support our schools. Social care children looked after. We look after 250 of our most vulnerable children, all corporate parents. But again, it's well recognised that the costs of that, especially the more complex cases, are really difficult. Our environment, roads and facilities are forecasting an overspend relating to their fleet repairs. Many of those vehicles are well past their sell date, but we've recently approved plans to get 12 new vehicles, which again will go somewhat a long way to alleviating that extra expense. There's a number of good news stories in 3.3 about where we've looked to kind of make savings. But clearly moving forward, it's really important that we continue to do this. As we always say, our reserves are low. They were the lowest in Wales when I joined the council in 2017, and that sadly remains the case. So it's really important that our officers continue to eke out every single penny they can to make sure that we don't overspend in the current years, which will help us with our financial stability moving forward. The report was considered at length by scrutiny yesterday. I'm pleased to say they supported the recommendations. So I'll move 2.2 members, which is to receive and note the latest financial assessment, the estimated budgetary position for 23-24, and happy to open it up to any questions or observations, members. Thank you. Councillor Jilly.
Thank you, Leader. I'm happy to second the recommendation, and just to highlight how well services have done to come to this position, and obviously working with the finance department. You know, in what has been, we say it all the time, unprecedented times, how difficult the situation has been. And you touched on it there, Leader, with excuse me, the number of children looked after increasing with the increased demand with homelessness and numerous areas. Demand is increasing probably across every area of the local authority, and yet departments are still managing to do their job whilst budgets are reducing. So it's just a thank you really to departments for working so hard to find a way through, and thank you to the finance department as well. But yeah, happy to second the recommendation as well. Thanks, Leader.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Liz.
Yes, I thank you for the budget, and I thank you, Amanda, for all your hard work that you've put into it. It is much appreciated by us all. But you know, the leader just mentioned now about children looked after, and when we think about it, research demonstrates that 1 in 6 children aged 7 to 14 will demonstrate a mental health problem. And age 16 to 19, it's 1 in 4. So we have a huge problem throughout the UK. And so I'm very pleased with the innovative practice that we have here in Conwy in driving forward how we can make changes and support families who are in need. So I just thank Social Care and Conwy Authority as a whole for all the work that's put into this. So thank you very much.
Leader. Yeah, I mean, this certainly wasn't the term to come into politics, was it really, with all these huge financial pressures and constraints and how difficult it is for everybody. And I don't want it to sound like the Oscars, but I'd really like to thank Amanda for presenting the information to the committee yesterday and the questions that were raised. It's so straightforward now that this is the situation we find ourselves in. And I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved, right, all the staff. You know, I don't want to be hierarchical, but everybody involved in it, everyone is concerned, everyone is worried, and they're all literally putting their shoulder against the wheel. So I'd just like to thank everybody, and all your hard work is much appreciated. And I think how, as a council, this financial situation to present a balanced budget cannot be understated, the amount of hard work and the acute skills that have been used to get to this point. So I really thank everybody involved. Thank you.
Okay, members, I should have added before, sorry, scrutiny supported the recommendation, but they also made a further recommendation to provide a strong steer to Cabinet that work continues to eliminate recurring overspend in the final quarter in order to protect the low level reserves. But I think that's something we're all absolutely committed to whilst providing essential services to our residents. So just to add that in. If Councillor Jeff.
Just to clarify, Leader, I think it's 13 vehicles. I'm not sure whether I misheard you saying 12 or not. But it's 13 new vehicles we have. And can I also add my congratulations support to the finance team? I said earlier today, in fact, that an Ahmad podcast would be a very good idea following the committee yesterday. We could sell that across the country.
Well, exactly. We'd need to reserve the royalties for any so using our data. But no, yeah, absolutely. I have my thanks. And I think the report is really clear. I do not be surprised. Look at other councils in terms of how they present their budgets and the challenges that they face. And I think Amanda absolutely is to be congratulated on the level of detail and the information members have to make the difficult decisions that we have to do. So if there's no further conversation, members, that's the 2 recommendations from scrutiny, which I say I'm sure will all support the steer that we continue to look to drive that overspend down in the 4th quarter. I've proposed it. Did we have a seconder? Councillor Julie, can we show for in favour then, please? Okay, thank you, members. Okay, So the next agenda item, apologies, my laptop died on me just before the meeting, which is inconvenient. It's still within my portfolio, and it's look at the revised capital program, Q3 monitoring report 46 to 64. Okay, so again, members, with capital programs, we have to find a balance between providing essential projects that are necessary and being really mindful of the revenue implications in the long term. We're aware many years ago interest rates were virtually zero, and there was less concern about the impact moving forward of that on the revenue budget. But we live in very, very different times now, so we have to be far more careful about what we do and don't approve. If you look in the report, table 1, 3.3 sets out what we're proposing. It's just around £6 million additional. You'd note that over £3 million that is additional grant funding. Again, as authority, I think we've always been really, really effective at applying for and getting grants to assist us in delivering projects. And there are some changes there, the most notable one being the CRUMP funding, which again is to provide essential flood defences for our residents. In Conwy, we have the longest stretch of artificially protected coastline, and protecting our residents, making sure there's not a recurrence of the flooding incident we had in Towin back in 1990 is really important. Within that industry, we're seeing really big increases, way in excess of 20% in terms of the cost of delivery, and that's the primary reason for that. So it's a balance, isn't it? It's making sure we're as careful as we can be, but that we don't stop and don't do the things that we absolutely need to do, which would inherently cause more cost in the long run. So again, this went to scrutiny yesterday. They were supportive of the recommendations, which were in 2.2 to approve the net increase of 6.004 million to the total capital programme, and to note the total capital programme of 122.679 million and the third quarter capital outturn position for 23-24. Again, I'm happy to move those recommendations, members, and I'll open up for discussion. Councillor Gromway.
Thank you, Leader. Again, thank you, Amanda, and to preparing this report. As you said, it went through scrutiny yesterday, and there was supported, so I'm happy to second your recommendation.
Diolch, Gromway. Any other comments, members? No? Okay, if in that case, if we can show if we're in favour. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to the third part, which is the draft revenue budget and council tax increase for 24-25. That report is on pages 65 to 129. I'll just start by members by going to 5.3, just to note again the comments that I made in this report. I think it is really important that we obviously highlight the fact that this authority has made £82 million of cuts over the last 11 years. And we say that a lot, but I don't think it's registered just how difficult that's been and how significant it is. You will note later in the report that the total funding we get from Welsh Government, which makes up 72% of our total funding, is around 200 million. So it gives some perspective to the challenge of finding those sort of savings from your budget, and moving forward by next year it'll be in the region of 90 million. We've all worked really hard to look at areas where we can make savings, but we'll all be acutely aware that we are down to the bare bones now, and their cuts that we're being asked to make are really significant, and they are potentially damaging, and a lot of them unfortunately will be areas where we kind of know there will be long-term repercussions, but we have a legal duty to produce a balanced budget, and that this is what we're setting out to do, and this is what this report proposes. If we move on to paragraph 3.1, clearly it's a really big thing for us every year to set a budget to enable our officers to carry out the work that they do. Again, it's worth emphasising that it's a budget forecast. It's not a set amount of money that we will decide to spend. It's we have to work out the demand, the need, things that in the future, such as wages and stuff, and then we come up with a figure that we think we will need to deliver those essential services. We aren't lawmakers, we are law takers. We have over 2,000 statutory duties that we have to comply with. So it's quite a complex world that we live in. Paragraph 4 sets out the local government settlement that we received. Conwy received the lowest settlement along with Gwynedd. It was initially just 2%. There was some additional funding that came through, which, whilst welcome, actually brought the whole settlement up to 2.26%. That basically is £4.6 million increase to our external aggregate funding, which, as I say, makes up 72% of our funding. There's a variety of reasons for that. We know the funding formula provides 15% per head more in Denbighshire and 10% more in Gwynedd. We have lost a relatively small number of residents since the last census, but that's seen sort of over £3 million cut from our budget. I think fundamentally we all know the funding formula is really flawed. It doesn't recognise the increased cost of looking over an increasingly elderly population. But we are where we are. If we go to table 5.1, that sets out where we estimate the resource shortfall to be. We look at pay pressures for schools alone, there's £4.3 million there. There's an additional £2 million of teachers' pensions. At this moment in time, we are hopeful that will be funded through central government, but it still remains a risk. Our own pay pressures are £7.6 million. Again, we need to note that whilst we have some input into pay settlements, they are set at a national level. Teachers' pay is set by Welsh Government, and council staff, again, is set at a national level. So we have there sort of £13–14 million in pay and pensions alone. If we move down to the business cases, the 14 million, a big proportion of that, around 7–8 million, also relates to pay. So we'll use a lot of external commission a lot of external services. Domiciliary care would be a good example. We deliver 434,000 hours of domiciliary care. We've seen welcome movements in the sort of real living wage there, but that comes at a financial cost to us. There are significant changes there in terms of borrowing and interest charges, North Wales Fire Levy as well. So the vast majority of these are things that we have no choice in, but we have to look to bridge that gap. Table 2 on page 74 is a bit of an update on the current position. We've managed to squeeze some more budget savings. There's been some positive news in terms of energy costs as they're falling. We've been able to reduce our estimated budget for that. In terms of interest rates falling again, we've looked to sort of revise our projections for what we think interest rates will be. And you'll note right at the bottom, the additional share of the settlement we've got is £526,000. So the revised shortfall is in the region of £22.5 million. There's a number of pay assumptions there. We need to be prudent. Again, we don't set these, but we've looked to allow 5% for both council staff and teacher staff. Business cases on page 75. There were a number of business cases that were submitted. I think they were all valid and they're all necessary, but given the situation that we're in, we've had to be really, really careful. So we've pared those down as much as we can, that we can only support those that are absolutely essential. So we come down to 6.8. The essential business cases to be funded are 12.7 million. And there were one-off elements of business cases totaling 407,000. We're going to fund that from reserves. Reserves are incredibly precious. They should only ever be used for one-off events. But I think we're confident that that is a one-off event. 6.9. It's clear we are being really, really strict here. It doesn't fund business cases classified as stressing risk replacement of grant. So there is an element of risk there. These have been really difficult decisions. Officers don't put these business cases forward without a good reason, but it does reflect the severity of the situation that we're in. So if we take it down to 6.4, as I said before, we had a little bit of extra money, total of £526,000. Really important that we use that as well as we can to alleviate some of the more damaging cuts. So you'll note that we've made a decision to ask the schools budget reduction from 6% to 5.5%. That is a total of £378,000 going back into schools. That is 70% of the additional money that we had. We've always tried to support schools. That's been well shown through our budgets, but the situation we're in, it makes up over 30% of our budget. So we've had to make the difficult decision to ask them to find some savings. But I think that does show we've done all we can to try and assist our schools as much as we can. Telecare charges, non-statutory service, is a very valued service. We have to be realistic. We're always told we need to be more commercial, so we've looked to actually make that cost neutral. The original plan was to increase that by more than £2 a week. We have a little bit more money now, so we've taken a decision to soften that blow a little bit and increase it by £1 to £20 a week. A saving that was also put forward by Environment, Roads and Facilities was to move nappy collections from 1 week weekly to 4 weekly. You can see that that proposal would have saved £80,000. We are no longer proposing that. We think it would be unreasonable for residents. We're very proud of our recycling rate. We're in the top 4 in Wales, which is way ahead of our fellows over the border. We recycle over 70% of our waste. I think Wales is just behind Germany in that aspect. It's something we're very, very proud. But you know, where we've had a little bit of more money, when we can remove some of the less pleasant, for want of a better word, proposals that were put forward. But for me, it does highlight how difficult it is now to make savings when we're having to consider issues like that. There was also some additional money put forward into social care. When I say additional money, it was replacing grants that were originally going to be removed. One of the business cases that we weren't able to support previously was deprivation of liberty officers. I'm pleased to say now we'll be able to have 2 deprivation of liberty officers in place moving forward. 615 sets out the £12 million of reductions, 7.8 million on general services, and schools have been asked to find 4.61 of their budget proposals. If you go to table 4 on page 77, though, it actually sets out that schools, you know, as we know, set their own budget and they come to us, and includes pay, includes pensions, and includes their own inflationary costs. We will, despite asking schools to make those savings, be putting an additional £3.873 million into our schools, which does equate in terms of actually cash budget of a 5% increase. But you know, I do absolutely recognise, I'm a governor in 2 schools, as you all are, I think, governors, that it is challenging for our schools to make savings in the current climate and with the current level of need we've seen in a post-COVID world. So there are some other budget amendments there in terms of it sets out the importance of our reserves and balances and where they're at. All of that brings us to a situation where we have a shortfall of £6.875 million. Snowdon 6.37, a 1% increase in council tax raises £711,000 net of council tax reduction scheme. In order to close that gap, unfortunately, we have no choice but to once again go to our residents and ask for an increase in council tax of 8.9%, plus an additional 0.77%, which funds the North Wales Fire Authority. Unlike the police, their levy is not separate. It goes in with the council tax. I think it's important that the residents know where their money go, and I know there was consultations with the fire brigade and residents were really keen to support them. So I think it's right that we highlight that clearly. You know, the headline figure is 9.67. We were the highest in Wales last year. A lot of that is down to the budgetary position we inherited through lack of reserves. Last year, both our neighbours were able to use £4 million of reserves to bring their council tax down. We were not in that position. But we're aware other authorities in Pembrokeshire are proposing 16%, Carrickdiggy are at 14%. Really, really conscious of the difficulty people have in a cost of living crisis, but we're caught in a rock and a hard place. If we make any more cuts to service, it's our most vulnerable who rely on those services. So it's been a really, really difficult place to get to. I would note in 6.42, there are 55,800 dwellings subject to council tax. Of those, 21,400 receive a single person discount equivalent, which is around 25%. And just under 20% of our households, 10,500, are receipt of and are supported by council tax reduction scheme, and many of those will pay no council tax at all. Moving forward, members, I'll take you to table 7. This actually, on a service basis, points out where we've actually looked to spend money and invest money. You'll notice education in schools, there's that 3.873 million. There's an additional 1.695 million, which will be kept centrally by our school education services. Social services has seen a big increase of 7.6 million. We know throughout the country that there's escalating costs of adult social care and our children looked after. We've had to significantly increase our care home fees. Again, it's a statutory duty. We have residents who've worked all their life. It's absolutely right that they have a decent choice of care homes that meets their needs. Other services have fared less well, which is a concern. And we'll note environment, roads and facilities. Clearly, they have the ability to raise money through charges, but I'm conscious that many of those will be unwelcome to residents as well. I do worry about the state of our roads. I think our own work knows that we need about 59 million pounds to bring them up to the standard we'd like to bring them. But the reality is our budget every year is around £3 to £4 million. And it's a really clear example where if we had that extra money, we could do extra things with it. But we have arrived at a situation where we can put forward a balanced budget. It was supported by scrutiny yesterday. They spent a really good time debating that and a lot of good questions. And again, thanks to Amanda, all the information was there and it was very, very clear. I'll stop at this stage. I'm just happy to open it up to members for any questions or comments, and then we'll look at the recommendations. So thank you all. Julie.
Thank you, Leader. And my goodness, I wasn't sure if we would actually end up in this position where we could actually put forward a balanced budget. So, massive thank you to the finance department, to the SLT, to every manager, every member of staff across all services who've come together to find a way forward in a really difficult circumstance. I guess I just want to highlight the fact that it isn't us that puts us in this position. This is as a result of what happens in Westminster, what happens in Cardiff, and I think sometimes that just doesn't seem to come through out there. I think they think that it's council tax and we just raise the council tax year on year to pay for, they think, goodness knows what. But in reality, obviously the majority of our funding comes directly from Welsh Government and their funding comes from UK Government. And I would just ask both those governments to really pay attention when you hear now, obviously we've been in a difficult situation last year and other local authorities had additional funding they could use from their reserves. We haven't been in that position. And now other local authorities as well are finding themselves in a really precarious position where, as you said, Charlie, Leader, we've kind of taken that low-hanging fruit over the last few years. And now the decisions we're taking is not a decision any of us would choose to take. This is just the position we find ourselves in. And I would ask them to really listen, because where we are now is going to have an impact going forward. If they don't find additional funding, we're going to find ourselves, you touched on COVID there. What we're seeing from COVID, this is when we're really seeing the impact of COVID. It's the kids who are going into schools now, into nurseries, who were born during COVID. We've got some schools where you've got over 50% of the class that's coming in nursery are still in nappies. That's just unheard of previously, because these kids didn't get to interact. They didn't go to toddler groups and different things that parents over the years have learned to parent. We're starting to really see the impact of that, and they're going to have to find some money to support this. The COVID recovery fund that was in place, it was great through COVID, but actually now is when we need that. So I think UK government need to think, what can we do differently? Because it's not just Conway, it's not unique to Wales, it's across the UK, isn't it? They need to find funding going forward so that we can begin to address some of these things. Because if we continue to cut in the way that we're cutting, the consequences are going to be seen for years and years and years to come. So it's just frustrating. The work that's been done here, as I say, is fantastic to find a way forward. I think we've managed, as you've said, Leader, any additional funding or any way of moving anything about, we've channeled that into schools and we've channeled that into social care to support some of our most vulnerable members of the county, which is an absolute credit that we've been able to find that. I appreciate it's not as much as those areas might want or need, but it's the best that we can do in this circumstance. And that's why I would say, please, please, please listen to us, listen to other local authorities. We can't carry on with austerity. It doesn't work because it will cost 5-10 times more in 3 years, 5 years time than them investing now in that sort of preventative agenda or in addressing some of this need that's there. But sorry, I appreciate I'm waffling somewhat. It's just really frustrating that we constantly are having to try and find ways of scraping through when it's just not the appropriate way forward. When all of us are paying increased taxes in every area of our lives, there should be additional money that comes through from that, shouldn't there? But yeah, massive thanks to the team for finding a way forward. Thanks to the schools who continue to work hard, and every member of staff in our schools who continue to work incredibly hard in difficult circumstances with increasing demand on all areas across our schools. But yeah, I'm glad we found a way through, and I'm happy if you, I'm not sure if you recommended leader, but I'm happy to second that and appreciate all the hard work that's gone in, as I say, from everywhere. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. It's why I started by highlighting the fact we've lost £89 million from our budget the last 14 years. I mean, but that's a UK-wide thing. It's absolutely clear that local government is underfunded, undervalued and underfunded. And I do think that's an absolute mistake. And that's ironic because we are at the bottom of the food chain. We're not lawmakers. We're given duties that we have to provide. It's really interesting. I think if you look at 11.1, we've identified inflationary and service pressures of 29 million. I've already explained the vast majority of these are wages that we don't set ourselves. Welsh Government is supposed to provide us 72% of our funding. So that would have been £21 million. We've got 4.6. There's a huge gap there. But Welsh Government will say they've lost 1.2 billion from their budget because they're not being funded. But the reality is taxation, personal taxation rates are the highest they've been since the Second World War. By 26, 27, on the current trajectory, they will go past that. The NHS continues to take the lion's share of funding. In Wales, it takes up 50% of the budget. I think there's an additional 400 plus million has gone into health and social care. Well, we deliver social care, but that money's not coming over to councils. And I think there needs to be more recognition of that. I mentioned the hours of domiciliary care that we do, the housing adaptations, but even on really basic stuff, 10% of the NHS now is spent on type 2 diabetes. 80% of that spends on the complications caused by type 2 diabetes. Now, we have leisure centres that are at risk moving forward if they're not funded, and that's what keeps people happy and healthy and out of hospital. So I think prevention is always a big thing as a dentist, and there needs to be more recognition of the roles that councils play in terms of our mental health and our children. If they're not setting off the right path in life, then we have big problems. We say it all the time, but the anger is directed at us. We're told, oh, you've been given enough funding. Well, the figures are absolutely clear. We have not been given anywhere near enough funding. But as always, we'll look to find solutions for the really difficult problem that's before us. But yeah, Councillor Aaron.
Who's been part of the very painful and long process of setting the budgets. As Julie has said already, none of us here today, councillors or officers, wish to make cuts to our services. It's a necessity, and in reality, we don't receive enough money to run the frontline services, and the fact that we have one of the worst settlements in Wales makes it worst. Despite all of that, and despite the circumstances, I think the officers in the council has done really good work bringing these cuts into us. And this, of course, is on top of their day-to-day work that these officers are doing. So there's no one cut that's easy. Not one cut is easy, and as already has been said, we have to set a balanced budget. And can I take the opportunity to thank you, Charlie, Trine, Amanda, Jenny and Matt for your leadership. Thank you very much.
Diolch, Karen. I've got Councillor Sherrill on 9 and then Councillor Liz and Councillor Gromley.
Thanks very much, Leader. Yeah, just further to yesterday's debate in F&R, have we got any clearer idea today of the amount that we will be paying out in redundancy payments in our schools to the staff when the education cuts bite? Because as Amanda said yesterday, that these payments will be coming directly out of Conway reserves. So are you sure you have sufficient monies to meet these payments now these cuts are being made, unintended consequences, and have we a clearer idea of the amount, please? Thank you very much.
Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. At the moment, I'm not completely sighted on those costs. Redundancy panels are currently being held, and the Education Department are leading on that. I think an earlier indication was that it might be a fairly substantial sum of money, and obviously time will tell in relation to that. I've always had in mind effectively, and obviously it has always been the case, and this has always been the council's policy, that the redundancy costs for schools are picked up from the centre. So it's not a change in practice, just a change in volume. But in reality, it's a one-off cost that we will have to incur in order to yield the permanent ongoing savings. But as soon as I'm cited on the detail, then obviously I can make people aware.
Okay, Cheryl?
Yes, thank you. I'll wait to hear that. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Liz and Councillor Gromley.
Yes, going back to what Councillor Julie was saying about children going into school in nappies, that reflects on health basically, but health will say yes, it's the cuts that we've had in health that we aren't able to get the health visiting input to support families. So we then have to pick up the pieces in the schools. Unfortunately, the preventive agenda has always been the poorer relation. And I think we've got to somehow curb this trend, although this trend has been ongoing since the 70s. But it's the preventive agenda that we need to be working at. And I'm just thinking now, from a Health Board perspective, covers the whole of North Wales. A lot of our work that we do regionally, and it is a regional concern. And I just think that we have to think now of how we can work. I know that from a social care perspective, we are working regionally. I know that. But I think we now have to really think how we can improve funding on that regional, from a regional base with UK government and Welsh government, because it just keeps, there's no change whatsoever. And I've sat on the various panels where there's multidisciplinary partnership approach to working with families and children. And yes, there's a really good relationship in that work. But then if I can just tell you now that this year, we in Conway have experienced several delays for many young people in terms of receiving timely assessments. And there's currently an 18-month waiting list for neurological assessment for children that are showing signs of ASD and ADHD. Well, this impacts on Conway. We and education have to work with those families in supporting them with those concerns. And it is the preventive agenda. And so I do think that we have to think regionally now, both from an education perspective, social care perspective, and working with the Health Board on how we address this with governments, as you reflected on earlier on.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Entirely agree. Councillor Gromley?
Yeah, please. I would just like to second all the comments that have been made so far, and our thanks to all the officers for all their hard work in bringing us to this stage. One thing that does cause me great concern is the pressure that we're having on our services. As I can remember, 3RF, I'm very concerned that the continual savings we have to make does reflect on our infrastructure, in particular our roads. We've seen the changes in climate, which means we have milder, wetter winters, which certainly has an effect on many of our rural roads and many of our roads in general, because these milder, wetter weathers cause an awful lot of damage to our infrastructure. So I will be looking, as we go forward, putting more pressure on Welsh Government to realise that the infrastructure across Wales, as far as highways and our structures, are really feeling the strain. It's not just in Conway. You can see it nationally that the road infrastructure is aching and breaking because we haven't had the amount of investment as needed to maintain this infrastructure. So I would like to thank Amanda and all the colleagues for getting to this stage where we are in a position where we can bring a balanced budget forward, but it hasn't been easy and it won't be without sacrifices. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I think UK government did ring fence some money for councils specifically for potholes, and I think it would be very, very welcome because we're all really aware that the roads aren't in great condition. But as you say, it's not a Conway problem; it's a UK problem. But I think it does symbolise the situation where we're in, where the things are deteriorating and we're wasting money doing patch repairs when really, if we had the money to do it properly, we could alleviate the problem. So if there's no more questions or comments, Scrutiny said a really good discussion yesterday. They were supportive in general, but an amendment was put forward that, sorry, I'll read it out to you. The budget proposal set out in Table 6 of Appendix 1 be approved and the budget be recommended to Council, but that the Council tax proposal be shown as a combined figure of 9.67. I have no problem with the two being shown together. Personally, I think it's important that residents realise where their money's going, and I think it's important that they know what support has been given to the fire authorities. As I say, during the budget consultation, people are really keen that that service was maintained. So I think, Amanda, we can separate them, but obviously have the combined figure there because clearly that's what residents will be more bothered about, is what the financial ask is of them. But again, I don't think there's any problem accommodating that and having both, if that's okay, members. So if that's okay with members, I will move the proposal. Julie, you seconded me, but is there any other comments, members? If not, are we okay to go to a vote to recommend this to full council? Okay, that is carried, and that is the last item on the agenda. Wonderful. Diolch pawb.